I'm Bob Carney Jr. and I'm running with Bill Boyd in the Republican primary. One of the issues that has emerged partly from Mr. Emmer himself is the question of nullification and the ability of states, as he characterized it, to veto state laws. I've passed out a handout here. It has 2 pages on the proposing a constitutional amendment to be put to the voters. This is something that was introduced in March of this year. This bill amounts to secession. And I'm going to read just one sentence on here. It says, a federal law does not apply in Minnesota unless that law is approved by a 2/3 vote of the members of each house of the legislature and signed by the governor. So if this went into effect, our state constitution would be proclaiming initially that there would be no federal law applying in Minnesota. This is secession. It is not nullification. Now, the other side of this sheet is an email, and I received the email. I'm not going to say who it was from, but this is from, it was originally sent from J.R. Graham, who is a former Republican county attorney who was considering and running for Attorney General this year for the Republican endorsement. And I want to just read you his first sentence. You requested my comment on House File 3738 introduced in the 86th legislature. I am sorry that Tom Emmer was party to the introduction of this bill because it will earn him nothing but political trouble. If the bill is not quietly brushed under the rug and forgotten, as I think likely, the pundits in the press will run him down as a political crank and have some basis for doing so. Mr. Graham's email continued, the bill was introduced in the last days of the 86th legislature in order to placate a faction of radical but misinformed constituents. It was introduced in the knowledge that it would never be heard in committee, that it would never pass either the House or the Senate, that it would never be proposed for consideration by the people in a general election, that it would never be adopted, and that even assuming that the southern states were acting within their rights in 1860 and 1861, this bill is manifestly unconstitutional on its face. It might come back to haunt Emmer if, as I hope, he is elected. I wish he had found a better way to express the sovereignty rights of the state of Minnesota, for this bill distorts those rights and makes them look ridiculous, whereas, understood in a true light, they are exceedingly important and valuable, even if in the nature of things rarely exercised, and already acknowledged in the first section of the first article of the Minnesota Constitution, as revised in 1974 and amended to date. Again, this is from a very reputable Republican in Minnesota. He is currently living in Canada, but was establishing residence to run this year. I am calling on Mr. Emmer to explain himself. Does he seriously support this bill that he is a co-author of, and that in effect does call for secession? Or does he repudiate it, and does he acknowledge that he was pandering to what Mr. Graham describes as a radical element in the process of seeking the endorsement? I think this is a very serious question. Mr. Graham's email continued, it is properly said that we Americans have an inspired constitution, and the distribution of the sovereign power in the United States is one of the reasons that it is inspired. This view of things, not to mention other features of the original Constitution, was crushed in the American Civil War, which, however, settled only that the North had greater resources than the South, and it can at any opportune moment, which may be approaching but has not yet arrived, be revived in the future. Right now, for example, there is a suit by 14 attorney generals to secure a judgment of the United States Supreme Court that Obamacare is unconstitutional. I believe that such a suit may well be successful, but if not, the states may combat it by ways of more ultimate remedies, including interposition, nullification, or even secession. One reason why I am so anxious to see the suit succeed is that if it accomplishes its objective, the United States will be perpetuated, and there will be no need even to contemplate those more ultimate remedies, which are quasi-revolutionary, albeit that they are meant to be exercised in a lawful, rational, beneficial, and orderly manner in times of great crisis. I went on to read the next paragraph to the news conference. I want to read another paragraph that you don't have. Further comments by Mr. Graham link is available. House File 3738 is also defective in that it says that no act of Congress will become effective unless 2/3 of both chambers of the Minnesota legislature approve, which is manifestly contrary to the way legislative authority has already been distributed under the United States Constitution. The state of Minnesota cannot amend the United States Constitution. It would be dangerous if the United States Constitution could be thus amended. Maybe secession from the Union might in the end be necessary and proper, and I believe that the people of Minnesota in convention might exercise such anonymous power at some future date. But as long as we are part of the Union, we must play by the rules which have been agreed upon. This proposed constitutional amendment would be an affront to our sister states and might even ignite civil war. In short, I think House File 3738 is irresponsible. So I'm calling on Mr. Emmer to clarify his position. Does he seriously advocate this bill, this proposed constitutional amendment? He is a co-author of it. Or was he doing this just to pander to a radical element in seeking the endorsement? Any questions on this?
Thank you.
If he does believe in this, do you think it's harmful or to his candidacy come November?
Yes.
Why?
If he does believe in this, this is secession. This would be a proclamation.
That's your interpretation of what it is.
And it is also Mr. Graham's, who is an attorney and a former Republican district attorney, county attorney.
But that's not his interpretation of it, and you said repeatedly that it doesn't support secession from the Union.
Well, I'm calling on him to address this issue because he introduced it as an amendment. I'm calling on him to either acknowledge that he was not serious about this and in effect that he was pandering to a radical element, or to stand by what he introduced.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to mention too, on the Republican platform, the Republican platform does support nullification on page 10, current platform. Let's go back to that reporter's last question or statement.
But that's not his interpretation of it, and you said repeatedly that it doesn't support secession from the Union.
Mr. Graham clearly does believe Mr. Emmer's amendment amounts to secession. To verify this, let's look again at Mr. Graham's own words as I read them at the news conference. There are two parts to this paragraph. The first part critiques Mr. Emmer's amendment. The second part commences, maybe secession from the Union might be in the end necessary and proper. Mr. Graham concludes that Mr. Emmer's amendment might even ignite civil war. House File 3738 is also defective in that it says that no act of Congress will become effective unless 2/3 of both chambers of the Minnesota legislature approve, which is manifestly contrary to the way legislative authority has already been distributed under the United States Constitution. The state of Minnesota cannot amend the United States Constitution. It would be dangerous if the United States Constitution could be thus amended. Maybe secession from the Union might in the end be necessary and proper, and I believe that the people of Minnesota in convention might exercise such anonymous power at some future date. But as long as we are part of the Union, we must play by the rules which have been agreed upon. This proposed constitutional amendment would be an affront to our sister states and might even ignite civil war. The secession of the southern states from the Union was in fact what started our Civil War. The fact that Mr. Graham moves from a critique of Mr. Emmer's amendment to a discussion of secession demonstrates that Mr. Graham believes, as I do also, that Mr. Emmer's amendment does in fact amount to secession. On June 20th, the Star Tribune published an op-ed piece by Tom Emmer. Here's an excerpt. Our legislature should have a voice in whether federal laws should be made to apply to Minnesotans. That sure sounds like Mr. Emmer's secessionist amendment. Mr. Emmer concluded his op-ed with these words. Here's what I find truly bizarre. An endorsed Republican candidate for governor of Minnesota openly calling for secession from the Union in violation of his oath to support the Constitution of the United States. Minnesota Republican primary voters deserve an explanation from Mr. Emmer. So I'm calling on Mr. Emmer to clarify his position. Does he seriously advocate this bill, this proposed constitutional amendment? He is a co-author of it. Or was he doing this just to pander to a radical element in seeking the endorsement?